Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's noon Pacific on a Monday, which means it's content chat time. And today I'm super excited to have my friend and longtime content chat community member, Ben Rome, here from his new role, his new office, from his new membership association job. And he's going to share, though, all the cool stuff that he's been doing for the last 8 years since I met him in the membership association space. Because you see, spoiler alert, I've gotten the opportunity to work with him quite a bit. So I have been able to see firsthand how his approach was so different from the other association communications and content professionals I'd worked with previously. So I'm super excited to get to have him on Content Chat today to share all of this with you in the hopes that he will help you in your volunteer or staff roles at Membership Association take a little bit of a different approach to what you're doing. So Ben, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Erika. It's really cool to finally actually be on the show. I think I've been, ever since you started running it, and then tying obviously with Content Marketing World, never actually thought I'd be a guest on here. So now I'm in the Hall of Fame of all the content experts that are out there. I feel kind of nervous.
Well, don't be nervous. After all, you and I have shared a stage at Content Marketing World, and you've Lego minified me, which I gotta show everybody. This is kind of a preview of kind of things we might talk about. This is me, and this is really me, and it's pretty awesome. And Lego me sits on my desk, so I think of you every single day, FYI.
That's awesome.
So Ben, before we dive into the questions, why don't you share with folks who you are and what you do, so that way they'll have a little bit of context about your current role in organization.
Sure. So obviously, I'm Ben Rome. I'm the Director of Communications for the American Bus Association. See ABA on there. The first thing people are like, American Bar Association. I'm like, no, switch 2 letters and it's bus. No, but it's a hybrid trade / membership professional association based with the bus industry as well as tourism. So it's really this really kind of weird but cool mix. And if you think that's new, it's not. They're celebrating 100 years in 2026. So they've been around since the 20s, the 1920s. So it's pretty cool. And it's a really good challenge for me. It's something new to jump into. Industry's rebounding itself after the pandemic when tourism tanked. You're starting to see trends back up towards tourism in general and tour operators, but also the bus industry is going through its own changes. The recent run of closures with Greyhound stations, and trying to, put new transfer points and everything else out there. It's an interesting time for the industry, but all in all, it's on the way up. So being able to step in at this point and then helping it broaden its scope and appeal is really, it's a challenge, but I love that. It's something new and different for me. But beside that, so I've been in the association world since 2009, so about 15 years now. Usually in a publications or a content writing / communications role. For about 30 years, I've been a freelance writer. So writing chops I've had for a long time. I'm also a published author in a lot of different fiction anthologies, journalism articles, lots of topical material, long form content. And then I've also done game design for the last 20 years for small tabletop games. A lot of fun in that. That's very different, but I have a lot of different passions and things as we talk about. I just can't help it. It bleeds over into my professional life because I just can't keep them. I can't keep them separate. It's just not who I am.
See, and this is why we bonded when we met in person at Content Marketing World, because, I was the head of publications and then, marketing for Membership Association, longtime gamer, longer time freelance writer. So we have so much in common. And, to me, what's really fascinating is we both really believe in the importance of content marketing for associations. So I think that's probably a good place to start, because not every association really thinks about things through the content marketing lens. A lot of times there's still kind of an old way of thinking where it's like, okay, well, we have our publications and we have our member communications, and we have, and all these kinds of, old ways of thinking about things versus thinking about them through a content marketing lens. So I'd love to hear from you why you think it's important that associations do actually embrace content marketing.
So it's a really great question too, because I've worked with a lot of associations, not just in a full-time position, but also as a client. They were clients of mine for campaigns and stuff. And in the association space, and it's not as much as it used to be, but they're still stuck in this. We like to say the apocalypse happened. It would take 20 years for associations to recognize that trend because they're still stuck a little bit. But content marketing these days is how associations communicate with members. It's the primary driver, but how they do that can vary depending on the organization. So previously, the biggest vehicle is email. But even today, that's starting to wane. Even the stalwart holdouts, email content marketing just isn't getting the message out there anymore. You look at, we were just talking about this before the show. You took a look at open rates. It's a lie. It's a lie. It's a fallacy figure. You're looking at click-through rates. Click-through rates comparatively are really, really low. And when you're below the industry standard for that platform, like in Forums or HubSpot or anything like that, there's something wrong there. It means that they're just not interested. They're seeing it in their preview pane, which counts as the open, and then they're just moving on. They're not even deleting it. They're just moving on to the next thing. And the way that a lot of email platforms work, you can set it to, like, when you move to the next message, the message prior then becomes red, and it moves on that way. So you've got to look at different ways of communicating with the membership. So content marketing done right is the biggest driver. Depending the avenue that works for their audience is really how you want to do it. But the old ways, they're going past. The old ways don't work anymore, and they're starting to come around to that idea, especially when you have a mass pandemic that drives membership down or causes some memberships to fail. There's a lot of changes going on in the association space. So
I think people finally recognize that, associations are competing with so many other things that are grabbing our attention. They're not just competing against other associations. They're competing for you to give them your attention versus streaming something versus going to an online training platform, 50 other million places that you could be focusing your attention. So they don't have that kind of, let's say, built-in captive audience that they were used to. They're no longer the only source of information for their industry or for their profession. And I think not all of the organizations had really kind of caught on to that, and how once you no longer have a captive audience, that means you have to be creating interesting, compelling content. So with that, talk to me a little bit about the content that is working, because email, we don't know if people are actually reading or not, if it's a preview pane open, or if they're on a Mac client looking at email on their phone, then you're not seeing them at all. And if you see them turn up in your web metrics, you see them as direct, which they're not direct, but you can't track them. So what is actually working that we can, measure and look at and see, hey, this is content. These are the content areas we should be invested in.
So the best way to do that is you need to know your audience. You need to know where they're coming to you from in some respects, but you also need to know where they're located. Where's the community located? Email just isn't it. Listservs, don't get me started. But you have to look at your metrics, and you have to look to see where your people are at. And then you have to kind of look out in the landscape and seeing what's working with the industry. So if your industry is in electronics, then maybe it's electronic forums, maybe it's magazine forums, maybe it's there's probably a cluster of Blue Sky or Twitter, not calling it the other thing, clusters around those conversations as well. So you really need to first figure out where your audience is at. So they may be coming to your website to get that information. Your website may still carry dynamic content, and social doesn't work or email doesn't work. So if your primary driver is the website, you need to lean into that. So find out where they're at, find out what their constant go-to is, and if you don't know or can't discern from the metrics, ask them. There's no harm in that. Do a member survey. If you're at a trade space or you're in an event, ask them that simple question. It's one of those questions that it should come naturally, especially to marketers and comms people who are on the site doing obviously other things. When you have a chance to talk to members, say, hey, how do you get your day-to-day information about the who's this and what's this gadgets? What is it that you're looking for in your education space? Are you looking for micro or macro, or are you looking for long form education? And just finding what spaces work for them, and then going and seeing what's there. So it's going to depend a lot on the industry, but it's really, where are they talking about the latest in topics and trends? Where are they talking about education? Where are they talking about the things that your association is invested in? And then you should do this conversation not just once, but I personally think every 2 years or so, start having that conversation again, really kind of circulate, because we all know social media trends, they vary. I mean, you've got channels coming up and going away. Slack was a big thing and now it's not. Discord's now a big thing, but is that the right space for your people? Blue Sky is now replacing the other thing, and Threads is this and blah blah blah. There, constantly we're hearing about new startups and new communication angles, but 2 years down the line, are they going to still exist? Who knows? So it's a constant thing, a constant cycle to find out where they're at.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned member surveys, because I'm surprised how many organizations don't regularly survey the membership to ask some of those questions, yet they're still trying to get sponsorships. They're still trying to sell ad space in their publications and on their website. And you really need to understand, how your members want to get information and what kinds of formats they're interested in. Otherwise, you might be creating content that worked really well with the group of your members that are becoming member emeritus because they're retiring, and you're completely neglecting your up and coming membership segments. And if you do that for long enough, then somebody's going to come along and create a for-profit organization that's going to compete with you directly. And there's no getting those people back if you haven't been serving them.
Yep, absolutely.
And I love, the fact that, of course, that's one of the easiest ways to start sourcing topic ideas from folks too, because you'll start by asking them in the membership survey, hey, what are some things we should cover more? But I'd love to hear how other ways that you have found have been really effective in order to partner with your members to get, both great ideas and maybe even, great content co-creation happening.
So there's a couple of things that I've done that have been pretty successful. One is if you're seeing or inhabiting the spaces where your members are at, what are they talking about most? What topics or hot button issues seem to be important to them? And then the other thing too is, I'm hoping that people are connecting with, if not members, at least the board directors or anybody in that space. You're connecting with them on social media. You're hooked with them in LinkedIn. Maybe you're not friends with them on Facebook, but you're aware of their accounts and you can check them. Or at least they're, if you're working the company page, they're, following the company page, so you can, engage them there. But find out who's highly active in the social spaces where most of the members seem to concentrate. And are they active in the way of do they post their own original content, or do they just post insightful comments, or are they not active at all? Find out if they want to start talking about thought leadership in their space, or do they, do they see themselves as an industry expert? So they can be a contributor or advisor to that space and become a focal point in that, on LinkedIn. Because they may want to do that, but don't know how. Or they may have really great ideas, but they can't transfer that to the paper, to the keyboard, which is where you can offer to, assist them in that. You know, your board and your volunteers are great resource pools as well. There's a lot of them that really want to share that experience. They just don't know how to do it, or what's the best avenue to do that in. And that's where you can kind of provide that leg up assistance in there. I do remember a few years ago, we were at my previous place, we were trying to get the board to participate more in thought leadership. And some of them just like, they didn't know how to post an article on LinkedIn. Never mind putting in appropriate hashtags and imaging and, you know, all this stuff that we as content and comms people know, you know, to work the algorithm. You gotta have an image, or video is better. Make sure you're using the hashtags in the right spot. Don't overload, blah, blah, blah. Posting times, all that stuff. They don't know that. They don't need to know that. Well, you can at least shepherd them through that process. So, you know, and you can do some ghostwriting too. You know, if they don't know how to put things together, or they're like an avowed, you know, I can't write, that's fine. Tell me what you want to say, and then let's work it together and write something cohesive for you that they can then just paste. Those are great ways to do that. If your association has a printed publication like a magazine, or if they have their own internal forum, or like a Discord server, you can talk to them about, you know, providing thought-provoking questions every week, or contributing content to a publication. Or even if you're in an industry that has a lot of trade publications, start looking for them for places they can submit to. Maybe there's a trade pub that's considered an expert or a well-known resource in your field. Look to see if there's opportunities to submit on, you know, those articles or those points that they want to make. See if they can, you know, submit and find out the process for them and work them into that. Don't expect them to do that on their own. It's intimidating to someone who doesn't know. You know, they have all these great ideas in their head, but they're not like you. They don't know all the ins and outs. So you've got to help shepherd them through that. Those are all different aspects and avenues that you can use to drive member-driven content.
I think those are all such great ideas. And, you know, a lot of it just comes down to making it clear to everybody that you are looking for submissions. You are interested in their ideas, or for them to create content, because a lot of people just, you know, they think to themselves, oh, I'm not worthy, you know, to go to Wayne's World. You know, they just think, oh, well, you know, I'm just, you know, a regular person doing my job. But they do have, because they are that regular person doing their job, they do have that experience and insights from doing it, and they just need the encouragement. So I love that you make sure to do that. Now, of course, once you're doing all of this stuff, you do need to make the case to your board and to your leadership team that, you know, content is valuable, so that way you can spend more time doing it and or grow your team. So what are some of the metrics that you use in order to both show that what you're doing is working, and to kind of show the areas where you need more support or more investment?
So the first thing I would say is it's going to depend on the channel you're focusing on, because there are different KPIs for different channels that you want to look at, as well as what's your focus. I mean, what's your goal? What's your end goal? Are you looking at to drive content by X% by the end of the year in a certain time frame? Is it a campaign that you're trying to generate, or are you aiming for a live event and driving up, you know, leadership into that space? But once you figure that out, then you know what KPIs you're going to aim for. And then find out what that channel provides to you in those analytics, and what those analytics actually say. I'm going to do a shameless plug for Erika. She is an analyst. She's a great analytics person. So you can tell her, I want to use YouTube as a driving point. This is, you know, our people say they want video. We want to do video. We're doing 3-minute videos, but we want to drive it towards a live event. To drive increased registration. How do I read my analytics at the end of the, you know, at the end of the quarter to see if I'm driving to that? She can step in and say, you know, this is what you want to look for if you're not versed in that. And it's always good to have a second or a third eyeball looking at those things anyway, to either confirm what you're seeing, or they may be seeing things that you're completely oblivious to, because we all get our blinders on when we're going in. We're just looking at unique page count, or we're looking at session referrals, but we're not looking at bounce rates. We're not looking at 404 page pops that are happening, you know, that kind of stuff. I mean, you need to have somebody who's versed in analytics that can like dig that out for you. But what you want to do is, look at the topics of note in the channels that they're inhabiting. Is there like a key hashtag or a topic that keeps popping up? And do you have content that's matching there? You can find those things out. Do you have like a white paper on your site that suddenly is getting a lot of download interest? Do you know how to do the metrics to get there? Can you find, to figure out how to draw the downloads? Are you doing that correctly where sometimes people just link to a PDF and it's really all about the HTML, the URL link should be what's there because that's going to give you a better accuracy. So it's not just about knowing what KPIs and what analytic metrics to look at. It's also making sure that you're following through to make sure that you're making the most out of those metrics too. Because your responsibility is to go to the board and say, this is the strategy that we need to be inhabiting. And this is how we get there. But if you don't have the right metrics to report that, what you see as a bona fide success is showing in the metrics as an average to less than average fail. And you don't want to be doing that. So, not just looking for the right metrics, make sure you understand them and making sure that everything's set as best as you can to get to that.
And, of course, you mentioning PDFs made me smile because they are just fraught with danger because frequently people, weren't even able to track were people downloading the PDF. Or worse yet, they had a PDF that was named, ABC 1243X. And instead of being named something like, risk assessment PDF, which guess what people search for? Risk assessment PDF. That is a thing that people search for, but you have to understand the psychology of how people are going to access the information. And then you have to reflect that too. So that's, I'm not loving Google Analytics for, but I do love that they've finally made it so much easier to track things like PDFs that are being clicked on and downloaded on your site. So at least now that's not like this horrible, impossible dream to be able to track some of
it. Yeah, very true.
Now, normally, if I were having a meeting with Ben, since I have a tendency to talk to him on Fridays, he is in his home office. And his home office has the most spectacular Lego creations because Ben is a brickhead. He is a Lego master. He is just really great at that. And what is spectacular is that's not just something that he does in his own time. He has figured out how to bring his Lego expertise into some really fun and creative opportunities. So before we go to the next official question, I want you to share here what you did at your last job with Legos. That was, I think it was pretty unusual. And, definitely, I feel like just putting it out there as an example would be a good way to kind of broach this next topic.
So now we get to the fun part of today's conversation. So I will correct a misnomer. You say Lego Master, and that for us, that's a huge connotation. And that is a title that is earned. I have not earned that. My creations are paltry compared to some of the people in my Lego user group, as well as what you see on TV. So I kind of cringe when people say, you're a Lego master. I'm like, I'm a Lego creator. I'm an AFOL, adult fan of Lego, is what we commonly call ourselves. So there is that. But yeah, so I've been involved and invested in Lego for the last 11 years. I started out doing kits and then photography. And then I had the chance a few years back with our rebranding effort at my previous position, 2020, the year of so many things, was our launch of a Lego, was the launch of a rebrand. And so we were planning, so what we did a couple of things to celebrate this. One, we were going to have an on-site event where people could contribute and build part of the new Lego logo out of Lego. I'm going to get so confused. They could contribute to building the new logo on the floor space of this giant logo that we built out of Lego, or planned to build out of Lego. Unfortunately, the live event didn't happen, obviously. But so what we did was we brought in our designer who we hired, EJ. EJ came down, EJ Boken came down from Ohio to our office space. We set up a cleared zone. It was a clean room. It was only me and him masked up and everything. And he built the logo himself over 3 days. We live streamed it for the virtual event. And in the end, we had a beautiful, it was probably a 8-foot by 4-foot logo with the rebranded logo made entirely out of Lego. And it was put on display in the headquarters office, which then since moved when they moved locations. And it's still there. He also did smaller renditions of the logo of the previous organization's logos through the years. So they had a timeline of the logos, and then obviously this big one. So that was the first thing that we did. We had some custom built kits made that we offered for a donation amount that went towards the scholarship fund. That was the first year. We also had some build contests. We had some board members actually challenge each other into a build contest, which was really kind of fun. We hyped that up, for when we actually had a live event. A couple years later, we hyped up and we had a rematch the year after that. But we also did, since the Lego concept seemed to really take off, we put the build instructions for a small desk-sized version of the logo on the website with the parts count. And people actually downloaded those, built the logos at home with their kids, put them on their desks. We started seeing them pop up in all of our Zoom calls, which was really cool. So we took it a step further last year, and it ties into our comic project, which we can talk about later. We have 8 different characters, and we built habitat environments. So if you're not familiar with Lego habitats, they're either a 3-sided cube or a 4-sided cube, depending on the plans you use. And we built just environments, and then the characters can inhabit those habitats. We sold those kits at the conference last year for a modest amount donation. For a modest donation to the foundation, you got to have your pick of kit or kits. Several people bought the entire run for a few $100s, and we raised $7,000 in scholarship funds for the organization. And that was because it would have been more, but the Lego kits were late getting to the event. We lost a full day because of UPS error. So we would have had more sales. But anyway, we sold most of those kits, and it was pretty cool. And all of that came about from some chance conversations I was having with my Lego group, plus what I love to do, which is build Lego. On the second day, you see the bus that's back here behind me. I brought that in on my second day here at the new job with American Bus Association. So that's my Lego bus. So it's just part of who I am. And it's a great segue into the question I know you've got coming. So, but yeah, so we did Lego, and we used it as a way to benefit our nonprofit foundation. It's all towards scholarship seed money. I think it was a lot of people commented how great it was. They loved the fact that they could do that, share with their kids, and then also help provide books and class services to qualified students. It was really cool.
So in addition to it being really fun and visually interesting, talk to me more about why it's important for content creators like you and me to bring these things that we're passionate about personally into our workplace and apply them to the ideation and content creation, because it struck a chord with people here, and I'd love to hear why you think that is, and what kinds of personal things are appropriate to bring into the workplace.
Yeah. So being a content creative or a creator, or however you want to label yourself, there's a lot of different great labels that are out there. Excuse me. The overlying thing that I find I found this first as a writer doing game design. If you write what you know, it turns out really well. If you design what you love, you're going to enjoy it more and you're going to put more self into it. So the mantra, the maxim really is, if you create something with passion, it's going to show in that product. A lot of us keep our personal hobbies and interests and loves separated from work. And that's, there's justifiable reasons for that. Yes and no. But what I think about is, think about a chef. If you've ever been to a restaurant with a chef who's like James Beard Award winner, or someone who's a celebrity chef on Food Network, or an award-winning chef in what manner, almost every time you talk to them or you read an interview about them, the common thing that I hear is, I just love to cook. I love to serve people. There's always a personal story as to why they do it. Cooking brought them out of being homeless or being a drug addict or whatever. There's always a personal story there. And so because of that, because of their thankfulness or their generosity or their sense of compassion, they pour that into their food, and the food looks and tastes amazing because they're putting everything they have into it day after day. That's how much they love it. So when you're doing that with things that, and I apply that, and I know a lot of other content creators do this too. When you take something that you absolutely love and you infuse it in with your work, you get better work. You get a better outcome. My writing, you always write what you know is what you're told. You're told that not because you don't have to do a lot of fact checking for it. You do it because you're coming from a place of inside to put this out on a page. And that's where you get the really great award-winning stuff. And I hear that's a common refrain I hear from a lot of writers and writers groups who win awards or have, bestseller outside of the constructed bestseller things. Really good works means they poured a lot themselves into it. If you ever read a really great novel and then you read the acknowledgments, look how long or how much intensity they put into that acknowledgments. They want to make sure they're thanking everybody who has helped them, because genuinely those people, it's not just a name list. Those people actually in some way help that writer construct and form what they've made. So it's an easy way to apply it to content creation or content marketing. Take what you love and infuse it. So for Lego, I love the construction. I love the building. I love the idea of design, creating something out of something that shouldn't be there. Like you see Lego designs making animals and things that they're blocks. How could they possibly make something that artistic? But at the end result looks so fabulous. And, I see that with, working with a designer and then creating these things that resonated with, the people, the membership. It was a feel good moment. And then you do the same thing with so I created a comic series, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. But I love the art of taking, creating, using, sorry, I just got off track. Creating characters and stories that are applicable, and the point of my writing is to have an impact. So I want to have an impacting resolution, whether it's a formative thought or an inspiring action to take, or some type of in-depth call to action that's not just click me or donate now type thing. It resonates. You finish the content piece and you're really inspired to do that. That's where I drive. So infusing, those elements of storytelling into that is a way to create passionate content. Really, it's taking something that's personal and part of you and infusing that into your work. Why are you living your life as a personal and a work person? Why can't you live your life blended? And when you live your life blended and you put that into your work becomes so much better. You become better as a person, and then it's just, I don't know, it's you can't put it into, look at you, you're laughing at me. You can't, you try to put it into words, but it just makes so much sense when you're doing that. Don't have a dividing line. Look to see where you can blend your personal passions with what you're doing. And often you're just blowing out of the box when you do that. And that's where the most awesome content comes from.
And everyone's so worried right now about AI and the impact of AI on, creators. And what's so hilarious, of course, is that if you're creating this kind of authentic content that comes from this place of your whole self in all of the things that you love and are passionate about, that's you creating what the robots can't, to paraphrase Anne Hanley's recent keynote title, create what the robots can't. Well, they can't create these things that incorporate all of this stuff that you love and the decades of experience you have in some of these, hobbies or outside areas of interest.
Yeah.
So,
And it doesn't just apply to that. It also applies even if you're just taking the voice and creating, like, some brands have really interesting voices. National Park Service, some of those accounts are hysterical, and it's because the voices behind them, they're passionate, super passionate about ecology and the park that they're working for, or the animals that inhabit it, or excited to share that with people. You see that in the content generation they're making, and that's just their voice. They're not doing anything else, but they're passionate about that. It's the simple things that they're taking from their outside life and blending that into what they're doing with their work, and sharing that in a new way with people, because no one wants to read standard press release or there. So I think it was Yellowstone or Yosemite. I can never keep them straight. But when the buffalo, when your people are, don't play with the buffalo, people, please. The bison were out there, and they're constantly telling people, please don't, go up in there. Some of the tribes that actually have bison on their lands, and some of the national park services who are either affinity with the tribes or, close to the land in that space, they would come up with some really great hysterical messaging about, don't mess with the bison, people. I mean, come on. But it's the tonality and the humor that they put into it. And you could tell they were passionate about, the bison, but also, the protection of the species and making sure people weren't being idiots, getting tossed in the air, losing their pants and all that stuff. But it's just another example of just like, even just a little thing in their life. They may be, it's completely something different. And not everything in your life is going to translate into work. But the elements that are there in the different things that you, like TV shows that you enjoy, or games that you play, or even just nature walks that you take, or hiking that you do on the weekends or whatever. There's something in your personal life that infuses what you do there that can be translated into, across the boundary, into your workspace. And let's be honest, work is more fun when you enjoy it. And if you're infusing part of what makes you on the personal side into that, then work becomes a lot more fun and interesting, and time flies. You just, you're suddenly, it's like, oh, it's 5 o'clock. I need to leave. I don't want to leave. I'm enjoying myself too much.
I think it'd be helpful to talk through, how folks can, from a practical standpoint, go about, doing this kind of ideation based on their personal interests. And let's do it by you actually talking about how you came to do this ongoing comic book series and have these comic characters and a game and all of that, because I think talking through how that actually came to be for you would be a good way to show people how to, maybe go about it themselves.
So this is a story I like to tell. I know you've heard this already. So I'm on the second day of my job, or third day, one of the, like, second or third day of my job, and we had a staff meeting, and there was a rundown of a recent member survey they had done. They're trying to create personas for this career pathing they were wanting to do for their members, showing them the directionals that the scientists would take in their careers. And I'm looking at the volume of text on the slides and hearing about these four different, or it ended up being five, but they started with four different paths. And I'm watching them, and I had just started game mastering a Star Wars RPG with my local group. So this was in my brain already. And I'm looking and I'm going, well, that could be a character, and that could be a character, and that could be a character. And so how could I make that a role-playing game using those characters as archetypes? And then I thought, wait a minute, there's something here. Like, oh, and then the next thing they talked about was the membership was skewed towards a retirement cliff, and they were having trouble. They were struggling pulling in they call them YPs, young professionals, into the profession because they were not members. They were getting out of school and going into the profession, but they weren't interested in doing a lot what the association was doing. So I hear that and I'm like, whoa, if I could sit them down at a table and do a scenario role play using these archetypes, how would that game look like? And of course, that's my brain that started going like that. So I'm like, this won't leave me alone. So I sat down and wrote down some points, went to my boss at the time, and I said, hey, it's crazy. Here's an idea. Maybe we could use this to drive a campaign to reveal these paths because they hadn't released it to the membership yet. And she's like, interesting. She's like, do you have some supporting evidence for this? Do you have anything that you can like show as a prototype? I'm like, I think so. Went back through, I had Star Wars obviously at the time, so I pulled up some archetypes there and went back through a couple other games, pulled out archetypes out of there, which are sample characters. If you're not aware, when you start a role-playing game, if you're not sure how to create a character, they create some pre-generated ones for you with minimal background on it, so you can see how the game plays using those stats. That's an archetype. So I pulled off a bunch of different ones, and then we went to the CEO. I shared my idea. He looked at me and goes, see what you can do. I'm like, ooh, okay. So the first thing I needed to do was find out all these like intimate details about the job. What do you wear to work? What tools do you use? Where do you go? What's the most interesting place you've gone? What's the dullest thing you've had to do? I came up with a question bank of 50 questions. And then over the series of 6 months, I had one-on-one interviews on the phone because Zoom wasn't a thing. So I had one-on-one interviews with the phone at a couple of different meeting events. I had focus group talks with some of the people, made sure there was a mix of both, longtime professionals as well as students all the way across the gamut. After 6 months, I had a huge stack. It was like this thick of a folder of all these different responses and all these different things. And I could start to construct these characters. And there was so much. Like one of the big questions was, how did you get into this? How did you get into this job? There's so many different origin stories. And so I realized there was more here than just I could do with 4. So I created 8 characters, a male and a female of each archetype. And, with the appropriate diversity scale. And the next step was, okay, so how can we, so we're going to use these for the pathing, which is great because it's an example of what, how they got to these positions. We created to roll it out, we created a game at the conference using QR codes and meter boards and art and that kind of stuff. And then I talked to an artist of mine who does comics, and he also does storyboarding for movies and computer games. And I said, would you want to tackle this as an idea? Put each of these characters in a setting for me as a single scene in their workspace, and then let's see what we can come up with. And he came up with 5 fascinating art designs plus headshots for all of them. We used those on the game stuff, and I had 300 people running around the conference scanning these QR codes, answering trivia questions, trying to win prizes, obviously, but they were running around to all these different stations all over the place, and they loved it. And that's when I started to get the idea that this was actually a thing. So then the next step was, how do we create this to be a driver for the younger generation and not just coming out of college? I wanted to hit them before they got to college. I wanted to hit them in high school, because one of the biggest things that our members are saying is, I can't describe my job in 10 seconds. It takes me like 4 elevator rides and a 5-mile hike to explain what I do on my job. So part of I exaggerate a little. So my challenge was, okay, let's create let's create a comic story that encapsulates the day in the life of one of these different characters in the different side of the profession. We created I wrote up one comic, we illustrated it, we put it out, and 2,000 copies were printed, 2,000 copies were distributed and gone within 2 months. We gave them for free to the membership to pass out. And they were outreach tools. They gave them to youth groups and YMCA kids groups and career fairs and colleges, and it just went crazy with them. So we created 2 more after that. And then we created Spanish versions of those as well. And there's digital and print versions that they can ask for bundles if they're going to a career fair. They can ask for it. There's all the stories are different. All the characters are different. We have trading card. We made trading cards that encapsulated some scenes and and they were basically like vocabulary cards, like different aspects of the industry and whatnot. And they loved it. They thought it was. I mean, they went gangbusters over it, and we won. I think the award count was within a 3-year span, we won 25 awards for this whole campaign. And the whole idea was to create, and Robert Rose actually highlighted this back in 2017 or 2018. The whole idea was to do a 15-year campaign to see where the needle was and then where the needle ended. Unfortunately, I left 8 years into it, but it was going really well. I mean, it was really strong. The increase of young professionals into the association definitely jumped pretty high. And I can't say it was all from that, but the awareness factor. When COVID hit, these were the people who were on the front lines of responders. The awareness of what they were doing was made even more obvious by repointing people back to what is this job? Repointing them back to that comic. Oh, I understand.
You made it so much more relatable. It was no longer this, weird and slightly scary, term. It was, real people doing real work that suddenly was everywhere.
And we started using it. We created an introductory computer game for it. That's it's playable in 5 minutes, real easy to play for career fairs. So much collateral. We did a couple of animated video introductions, just all these different collateral that we made that was continuing to build upon this whole idea. And it's so great. I kind of want to figure out how to do that with this industry now. It's a little different. But I'm sure there are ways that I can, take those types of things. And it's because I had connections in the comic industry. I have connections in the computer industry, because these are all things that I've done as a freelancer and things that I love. And the people whose work I love, I connect with them. And then we look to see, what can we do to collaborate? What can we do to make something different? Because they're always looking for something to stand out of the norm.
Totally. And these are really good examples of thinking creatively and way outside the box and having it pay off. But of course, these are the things that worked out. And, not everything we do as creators does work out. So I'd love to hear from you, maybe some examples of some things that didn't work out, or just some of the kind of common pitfalls you've seen over the years when it comes to association content marketing that doesn't necessarily get the expected results.
I would love to say I'm the golden goose and everything I do works perfectly, but that's not true. No, I mean, for every good idea that I brought to the table, there's been some less than stellar ones. One recent one last year, I proposed the foundation of one of the foundation's clients that I was working with was trying to do a immersive scenario, half day workshop on presenting research and foresight. And so I proposed a learning simulation, very similar to the way the old school we used to do with in high school with the United Nations, Youth United Nations. Make up a few fake countries and deal with a crisis. So I created some personas, some profiles of some fake associations, and then tried to work it into a gamification scenario. I didn't read my audience right. I expected my audience to have X level. They had nothing like that. So half the time was spent trying to explain the rules to them. And about halfway through, I realized this was a dud. It was not going to do what we wanted it to do. And what the board, the team and I were hopeful that it would get to one set of expectations, but I think we all just kind of misread the audience, the intended audience that we had. So it didn't work. It was a bomb. And, I'm embarrassed to say it was not one of my finer design elements, but you sit there and you look at what did work and what didn't work, and then what didn't jive with the audience, like those things that were good, but it wasn't the right audience for it. So what kind of audience were you actually like aiming for? And then, you know, if what using those elements, what would work with the audience that you had, and figuring out two different ways that you could like modify things for next year. So we'll try again next year with a couple of different things in mind, knowing that there's going to be some hand holding and there's going to be some other, there were some resistant points that we had, but you know, because it was way too different, and it was too fast. But that was probably the biggest glaring issue. But the thing is that, you know, you have a fail point. You don't sit and mope about it. You pick apart what worked, what didn't, what was received, what wasn't received, work with the team, figure out what can be changed, if something can be changed, or is it just an idea that needs to be scrapped altogether, maybe brought out in 5 years when you have a chance to do it again with a completely different audience and mindset. So yeah, as far as like what I've seen elsewhere, video creation has been leaps and bounds, even in just in the last 5 years since I started doing it. There's some really creative takes out there, but you have to be very careful that you're doing it right by your audience. You can't be like trying to be all TikTok-y if it's not a TikTok audience. And I say that in the sense of, you know, there are people who are doing TikTok style stuff on YouTube, which is the only channel they have. But YouTube is a different thing sometimes with like their ad plays and all that stuff that goes on. There's restrictions that are there. But not only that, your audience on YouTube is slightly different than TikTok. They're not using, it's not the same approach. So make sure you're not embarrassing yourself by being the old man in the room trying to be a TikTok maven. It's just not going to work. So make sure you're understanding your audience. That's really what it comes down to. And that's pretty much the thread of the entire conversation we've had is you got to know your audience. If you don't know your audience, stuff you're going to throw at the wall isn't going to stick. It's really comes down to.
Like I know I've been seeing a number of questions or comments lately with folks wondering, you know, hey, is there a place for B2B marketers, for example, on TikTok? And it's like, well, it depends on your audience. Is your audience, you know, that age group? And are they consuming a bunch of content? Are you adjacent to something like Book Talk or, you know, some of the crazy food trends and things that are happening there? In which case, sure, maybe, but you're not going to know until you try. And I think it's important to not be afraid of trying and being okay with the fact that it might fail. Because, you know, a lot of times when you try something completely new, a new channel or a really new approach, you know, there's a good opportunity for it not to work out. And you have to be okay with that. And if everything has to be a slam dunk home run, you know, knocking it out of the park, then I guess you're just going to have to keep doing what you've been doing, because that's not how you innovate.
Yeah, and the thing there's a mantra. There's a Japanese proverb I love, and I kind of live by. It's fall down 7 times, get up 8. You just gotta pick yourself up and keep going. Don't take it personal if it doesn't work. It's just a try. Everything's a try. If you don't try, how are you going to know if it's going to work? But you have to accept the fact that on the upside of success is going to be a fail. And if you read the fail correctly, it's just a stepping stone to another success. If you incorrectly read it, it's going to level you, and you're not going to go anywhere.
Totally. So I'm wondering, you know, in addition to the work that you do, like where do you go to find inspiration and see some of the, you know, interesting stuff that other associations are doing that's a little out of the ordinary? Do you have any tips for where folks should be looking, or how they can get this kind of inspiration?
Well, I think the easiest thing to do is who are your competitors, or your who is in the same space as you, or at least has some Venn diagram intersection with you in your space. I'm still learning that in my job, so I've got to find out what my competitors / member organization, who are member organization, organizational member. I got to find out what they're doing in their spaces as well, and what's working for them. If you have to go to an event and immerse yourself in their audience. It's going to be different than your audience. What makes them tick with what works for them. Subscribe to their newsletters or publications, especially if you can get them for free, just to read up to see what's their tone like, what's their following. Does it look like there's engagement there? On some social media channels, you can see what at least likes and comments. might be. Like, what kinds of comments are they getting? Are they getting any engagement at all? Or are they just throwing this stuff out into the ether? If you feel comfortable, reach out to their content person. If you can find out who it is, reach out to them. Just say, you know, hey, I just like have we have the same audience, or share segments of the same audience. Let's have a conversation. What works for you? What doesn't work for you? You know, you're not trying to compete with them. You're trying to find out how they're reaching their people, and that might spark something for you. Same with tone. What's their tone like on social? What's their tone like in a Discord server? Do they let them, you know, is it, do they let the inmates run the asylum, or are they, you know, more constructed and ordered and, you know, elevating, you know, right thought-minded people and, you know, making sure that the trolls are at bay? You know, what's their situation look like? So really just kind of feel them out, look at your competition, find out what they're doing, get a sense for it. You don't want to copy them, but what you're trying to do is inspire yourself. Like, well, you know, being humorful on this channel seems to work engagement wise. What are the opportunities that I have to do that with? The easiest thing to do is look to see, like, what's the common trend like in pop culture. The Barbie movie, they put out a whole lot of cool ancillary auxiliary stuff that you could use to do that. You know, like color up your avatars. I did a few years ago, we did the Halloween Spirit thing on LinkedIn. We used LinkedIn, created costumes for all of our audience segments, created some funny captions with them that were tasteful and not insulting. We didn't want to insult our people, but put them out there. That campaign was just an ad hoc last minute throw. It blew the roof off everything else we did the rest of the year. Nothing compared to it. It was like, we were still getting Halloween engagement by Thanksgiving. We were still seeing those things being shared. It was amazing. And you saw, I mean, you're doing the analytics. You saw the spikes there. You're like, what's going on?
Yeah. What was really cool is then, you know, the lessons learned from doing that were all applied this past year. And that content that, you know, came as a result did even better. I mean, I've never seen literally 100% engagement, that everybody who saw the content engaged with it some way on social. I mean, it was exceptional.
And that's where it comes back to you've got to know your audience. Got to know your audience. You fuse that with everything else we were talking about, you're going to have success in whatever content you're creating. Totally agreed.
And with that, we're just about out of time. So Ben, if folks want to connect with you or see what you're working on, get a peek at your Lego inventions, where should folks go to get more Ben?
So the primary driver is LinkedIn. Just look up my name, Ben H. Rome. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me. I have a link tree on my profile that drives you to published works, photography, my blog, my website, any other social media avenues. I don't do a lot of social media personally, but you can find all that stuff in Linktree, which can be found in my profile information on LinkedIn. So
excellent. And with your recommendation here at the end that folks should really be doing a content audit and social audit, I just want to put a plug in for the fact that we have templates for that on the website. And we'll link to them from the recap, which will go up at the end of this week. So that way, if people are looking for a little bit of guidance on, how to organize their thoughts around this, we've got a template for that, because of course we do. I love a good template, as Ben knows. But I have to share this because, I agree completely. More Ben. Yes, Ben, we definitely are going to have you back again, because I think you just had such, you have such a refreshing perspective, and, you've done such a great job of being your authentic self at work. And I think that it gives people hope that you can, in fact, be a human being at work and have fun while doing content marketing. So definitely we're going to have you back.
Awesome. Thanks, Erika. I loved it. Thanks, everybody, for listening to me blather for an hour. It's appreciated.
Have a great rest of your week, everybody. Take care.
Bye.